I'm James, this is Joshua.
Hello.
So we started this presentation about, 6 months ago. We were looking and saying, hey, FinOps seems interesting. But we do most of our stuff internally. We couldn't really think of anything that would actually be interesting. And then we started thinking like, okay, what's actually novel about how we manage capacity, and is there something applicable? And what we came up with is really more of the product side, how we manage the demand at Instagram and Facebook. So no surprise, we spend a lot of money on capacity, but we don't really look at like some of the stuff you see on the expo floor that's really like asset management. It doesn't quite work for us. So we wanted to talk about how we're doing it at the feature level.
Button working. There we go.
Yes. So just to give you kind of an overview of how it works at the company, we have the traditional structure of finance and then sort of the engineering. We also have an infra org, which is quite large. There is a central efficiency team in there. We are not part of the central efficiency team. We are actually part of the product team. So I'm on Facebook. You're on Instagram. Do you want to give an overview about what you do?
Nah. I guess so. I'm Josh. I'm a software engineer. I've been at Instagram for 6.5 years. Started right before COVID. And been entirely building things inside of efficiency and capacity for Instagram that have now spread across the company.
Yeah, so I think I've been there about a decade, but for the last 6 months, I've been working on helping Facebook get better value for what we're spending. So we have quite a bit of capacity, both in public cloud and then internal. And so I think echoing a lot of the breakouts and presentations, we're not necessarily trying to spend less. We're trying to get better value for what we're going to spend. Because in a lot of cases, AI in particular, are really just constrained on access. So it's not, can we spend fewer and use fewer GPUs? It's can we do more with what we have? So that's kind of the point of this. We wanted to get into how we're actually looking at the value we're getting for what we're spending.
All right, thanks, James. So I'm going to give a little bit of a story about how Instagram came about with this situation. So prior to 2018, our engineers were basically told, build stuff, get more eyeballs on the app, get them to spend more time. There's a question about whether that's a good or bad thing, of course, from a social perspective. But that was the goal, to get more ad money. And don't worry about capacity. Don't worry about how much it spends, costs. Capacity, the central infra, will build out enough data centers and have enough stuff for you. And this was working pretty well during the early days. But right around the end of that time frame, people started to do projections, and we're seeing like, hey, we're not actually getting as many people for the amount of money we're spending, and our spends keep going up. And this doesn't seem sustainable from two fronts. One, like if you're not getting as much money, what do you do about it? And then two, at some point, you're going to beat out the actual build of the capacity. And so they decided, hey, let's start up a new team that looks at this stuff in Instagram centrally. Let's figure out why it is that we're spending so much on capacity. And so what this team did that I ended up joining in 2020 was they would look at regressions that would happen. Someone makes a change, and suddenly some part of the code increases in cost. We would see this jump in the cost, and we'd be able to route it back to being like, oh, that person over there made this change, or this person turned up that knob. And you go talk to that engineer, and that engineer would go, oh, my bad, let's go fix it forward, let's go roll it back, whatever it was. And so this was a reactive process, that as things were going out and we'd run up, we would fight it back. And that did slow the bleeding. But eventually we would run out of capacity anyways, because people weren't thinking about it up front, it was after the fact. And we'd hit this part where we'd be like, whoa, we're out of capacity. Let's start a global freeze. Let's have everybody who's an engineer in Instagram stop and go do all the optimizations and efficiency work that they kind of knew, like, yeah, I should probably do this. But they just never got around to it. And then what would happen is when that would finish up, we'd release, everyone would just go back in and launch stuff, and we'd have this big problem again. So this was a tragedy of the commons type of problem. Everybody was contributing to it, but no one actually knew how much they contributed. And then when we'd freeze, no one would know how much they had to fight back on it. What is their part to do? So we got to a part where we switched over from this kind of central perspective to really start to divvy this up and federate it out. Think about the surfaces you have on Instagram: feed, Reels, Stories, Explore. And each one of them could now see how much their usage was. We would say, hey, here's what Reels usage is overall in capacity. All the actions that go on that are going to be there, and we can observe it over time. So over 3 months, how is it growing? What's happening? From that usage, we could give them all capacity budgets. every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever, here's where you need to stay under. And your job as a product team is continue to build stuff, but stay within this line. And the piece that we're here to talk about today is what we did in order to make this going from a reactive process of saying like, oh, you went over, now what? Into how do we get in front of that so that before the thing that happens that causes the capacity to increase, we can measure it up front. And so that's what we're going to see. Here's some very straightforward sort of thinking about ROI. So we can think about the fact that we know that our product engineers have always thought about the business impact. How is it that I drive up more eyeballs on the app? What they've never had before was the ability to understand that cost up front. So suppose we have both of those things together. When we think about like how to make good return on investment type of decisions, we have things that are on the top left corner that are green. Things that cost very little in terms of infrastructure costs, which is the x-axis, and things that are high on the business value, which is the y-axis. If it costs little but gives you a lot of value, absolutely, that's where we want to spend our capacity. Things in the bottom right corner, those are things that we want to eliminate, things that cost a lot but don't give us a lot of value. And maybe they gave us value in the past, but they don't do anymore. Those are things we want to clean up to free that capacity up. Everything else that's kind of in that diagonal around the ROI line, those are things that we have to consider. Like, this barely moves the needle at all. Maybe it doesn't cost much of anything either. Is it even worth putting out there? Because eventually you have code costs, just maintenance and stuff to think about. Or maybe we have things that are valuable, but they're really expensive. Maybe it's worth it for us to spend some time to optimize it and get it, increase the ROI. So like basically we can think of each one of those possibilities happening. So let's put this into a hypothetical example, feature A and B. Here, if anyone looks at this and you only have this information in here, what you can understand is that A is just better than B, period. Better improvement in engagement. Also, we have some information that we do know about our budget. In this case here, let's say we have $20,000 left to spend. So if we put this on that chart that I had before, what we know is that the business value of A is better than B, but we don't actually know the cost. What happens if we actually have the cost? Two things. One is that if you were to look at this, you'd be obviously, we can't actually afford $30,000 a year. This is a no-go. A, we just can't afford it. And then B, you would say, actually, potentially A is below the ROI line. This is not worth doing. All right, so hit the button. Next, James is going to talk to us about how experimentation works.
So before I get into sort of the specifics of how it works, I want to actually define what we mean by ROI, because this is not the traditional definition. So I think you alluded to it. It's basically, if I spend this amount of money, what do I get in return? So in order to calculate what we spend, this is not that complicated. You look at, OK, what is the delta in your cost? So you measure before and you measure after. I'll get into how we measure the product impact, because that's a little bit outside the scope of FinOps, but we'll get there. But is this kind of what people are expecting from ROI, just by a show of hands? OK. So in a lot of consumer-facing and even B2B products, experimentation really drives a lot of product development. So there's a lot of features you build, you roll out to a couple customers. Sometimes this is anecdotal and hands-on. You say, hey, very close customer, does this work for you? And you iterate till you do that. For a lot of big scale stuff like Facebook and Instagram, we use a little bit more of a data science perspective. We roll it out to a small group of users and we run an experiment. We say, did it move the needle on the stuff we want? Did it move it in a positive direction? Are those metrics statistically significant? Did it move it in a negative direction? Often it's not conclusive one way or the other. There's some things that improved and some things that regressed. But again, the traditional thing that we were looking at, say 5, 6 years ago, purely on the product metrics. We weren't considering costs at all. So we were really just looking at the return without the investment. We also did look at some technical, metrics with this. So obviously error rate and things like, okay, well, why did this metric go down? Is it because it added latency that caused people to not use things? So there was already a little bit of precedent for considering other factors other than, say, eyeballs or revenue. So this looks very similar. This is completely made up data. Is this familiar to anyone in this room? just by a show of hands, has anyone looked at the, okay. Probably a lot of the PMs in the group start to look at like, okay, this is just saying of these metrics, how much did it shift? What's the error bar? So this is roughly what we look at and have looked at for a long time on how we ship features. So we look across a number of metrics. We look at like revenue, engagement, retention. What these are varies vastly across the different features area. So even within something like Instagram, different areas are looking at different metrics. And this is not something we can standardize. This is not something we've even really attempted to standardize. You look at something like Reels, right? It's video. So it's like, how much are you actually watching these things? There's really not like a revenue impact. And you look at other things like feed, you could imagine, well, how long did you spend, sort of scrolling on those? So we're really looking at, how good is the feature agnostic of cost based on something like this, and how much and how significant were the improvements? So how do we get these? I'll get into the cost in a second. So roughly you can think of this as we have different event logs. So like the one I said was, streaming, right? You're looking at Reels and you're saying, well, how long did you do that? So we have events in the app. This is fairly common just from an observability perspective. You need to know when someone takes an action. That action could be moving away from something. It could be pressing play. We also know exposure logs. So we know what users are in different experiments. We know if you're getting, maybe better quality video, for example. So we can join these and we can say, well, if we gave you better quality video, you're more likely to watch longer because the quality is better. And so with that, we can actually get that chart that I showed beforehand. We can actually say, okay, for this experiment versus the control group, this is the improvement on these specific metrics. So again, this is pretty traditional. If you use any experimentation packages, this is kind of what it's doing behind the scenes. So the problem is for those capacity metrics, we don't really have an easy metric that says, well, what did this cost? It would be great if we had that same engagement metric. We could say, well, just add that as another line. Unfortunately, we don't have a set of capacity for a feature. A feature is not a collection of services or databases or tables. It's really code. So when you're rolling out a new feature, you're saying, well, I want you to behave like this instead of this. And that has capacity implications. And so unfortunately, because we're running this big monolith, it's actually quite hard to measure the impact of this. So you can imagine, really, this is what these surfaces look like. So if we allocated, everyone said, hey, there's a real service, and then there's a profile service, and a marketplace service, that would be very nice. And you could say, well, okay, over time, you're rolling out this, and we give Reels this budget. But the reality is it looks much more like on the right, where it's just an overlay on top of these big monolithic services. And so what happens when we add a new feature that we roll out? That was not supposed to happen. Oh, let me go back. So what happens is these boxes change. They get larger, they get smaller. Maybe the front end takes a little bit more capacity. Maybe we use a little bit more storage. Maybe we use less storage. But that's what we're trying to look at, is how do those boxes actually change? Because that's what determines the capacity consumption that we're using. So how do we actually go and get that? Well, again, because we're using all these monolithic services, we actually do have quite a bit of logs. These logs were not originally added for capacity and cost usage. They were added for observability. We need to know who's using our services, what happens if there's errors. So what we're able to do is take those same shared service usage logs and join them in that same set of pipelines. So now we not only get the experiment to product impact, we also get the experiment to capacity impact. And so now we get this beautiful list where it shows not so much the cost, but it actually shows what specific metrics in terms of capacity. So we can see that there's a change in the front end, the ranking service, and the media. And what we can do for this and say, okay, well, in this control group, it cost this much previously, and then there was a change in this one. We can also look at, is this capacity use just in the normal variance, or is it actually statistically significant? Often we'll run multiple different arms of an experiment. We can say, well, like you talked about optimization, right? We can say, well, if we did this slightly different, maybe we give you high quality in only the beginning of the video, it actually produces this much impact. So we can do a lot of things once we start attributing the usage of capacity back to the specific part of the experiment.
All right, we're going to get into the actual tool that we have, the launch review tool. So giving a little bit of an overview of our operating environment, basically every year, there's a bunch of finance and leadership people who get together and they have to figure out, like, what do we want to spend on? And this relates to everything, but one big piece of this for us has been, how do we build out the data centers and figure out how much we need to pay and get up front, because that's not something you can snap your fingers and have a new data center up there. And they're looking at where the apps are, where do they think they're going to grow to, how much more time will people spend on Facebook, on Instagram, how many people we have, et cetera, all that type of information. Every quarter, the same leadership and product teams get back together, and we have to figure out what do we do as capacity is coming in to give it out to various places. And so like Facebook is getting a certain amount of capacity. Where do they want to buy it? What do they need? What does Instagram need? Instagram will look at some modeling aspects of where we have been using it and make projections as to what we want to buy. Facebook, on the other hand, will actually federate it down and ask those groups, what do you want to buy? They'll probably bring it back up and go, all right, we'll make sure we order that. We give that all up to infra. Hopefully infra figures out, is this even possible to buy? And so that's happening about 9 months out. Every 6 months, we have our typical like product planning sessions that every engineer, I think, hates, figuring out like what is it that we have to build, what are we trying to hit? And so product is saying, okay, well, these are the goals that we're gonna have for our product piece that we need to hit. Hey folks, what do you think we can build out in order to hit that? And also keeping in mind how much capacity is coming in.
One thing I want to highlight, these goals are not necessarily the same as those experiment level goals. These are like big, multi-quarter half goals.
Good point. And lastly, as all the time engineers are building things out, product is making stuff, they're setting up experiments, they're running experiments. If you've ever had a case where you're using Instagram or Facebook and like someone else and you're like, hey, I have this feature, and they're like, no, I don't have that. It's because one of you is in an experiment, the other one isn't. And we are measuring both the capacity costs as well as the engagement aspects for all these things. And you're probably in tons of them all the time. So yeah, all this stuff is happening throughout, and also throughout all this time, infra is saying, okay, we got the machines, we set up the data center pieces here, here's some more capacity that's now available for you, products, Facebook or Instagram to use, distribute as you want. Okay, so really what we're dealing with here with LRT is taking a world in which all we have from an asset level perspective, a bunch of machines, a bunch of like hardware, and having a question of like, well, how many servers do we need to buy globally? And really taking that information and breaking it down for the level at which engineers are actually working at. For their given feature, how much are we getting out of it? How much does it cost? And how much are we getting back business-wise? Knowing that, we can actually make decisions on that. And like let people decide what actually they want to spend it on. And the biggest piece of this is really that instead of us doing what I mentioned before, which is people would roll out changes and we would find the problem and then root it back and go like, why is it so expensive? And then have a long discussion. The discussions can happen up front. If assuming the measurements come out well that we have, we can actually see the capacity that's going to be there. And the discussion goes, this seems kind of expensive for what we're getting back. What are we going to do about that? So really everything is shifting left away from being reactive to something that we can make decisions on and have more of a portfolio perspective. Particularly as the teams and the groups are larger, they'll have a lot more engineers saying, hey, I'm ready to ship. What do we actually decide to do?
Do you mind talking a little bit about how we handle, you were talking about even unshipping features.
Yes.
Like in this case, like what would we do with feature C if it actually had already shipped?
If feature C had already shipped and you somehow got the engineer, like it can be tough. Let me put it that way. Nobody wants their work to be undone. And so like you really have to prove out that something is not working out and they have to kind of sign off on it. Or maybe someone comes in from over the top and says, we have to do this. So we can turn things back off, assuming that we've kept things in the appropriate type of knobbing setup to reduce it. So finding out after the fact that something isn't as good is a way we can turn it off. But more preferably, most of the time, we actually want to catch it before we have to go through that.
Yeah, I will say on the FB side, we really struggle a lot with like regressions. So sometimes we'll do some measurement and we'll do the measurement and then someone changes the code and we're like, oh, well the original version was actually performing at this and now you've made it a negative ROI. So maybe we end up having a little bit more of those cases where we have to unship.
Yeah, it's always tough with people. So here's what the LRT workflow kind of looks like. An engineer is getting ready near the end of their work. They've put all their code out. They've got the experiment basically ready. They create this request. And the main part is that it pulls that experiment, the estimation data that James was talking about earlier, both the business metrics as well as the service cost, the capacity cost. That comes together to generate a simplistic ROI value that a capacity reviewer on that area can look at and say, does this meet the ROI bar? If it does, great. If it doesn't, maybe you still want to do it. Maybe this is something that leadership has said is strategic, that like, we don't care that it doesn't produce the value today because it will eventually produce the value with things coming up. So that decision part really comes down to maybe one of three choices. You may approve it right away, in which case the engineer's like, sweet, I get to launch. Maybe you say, hey, you can't do it right now. We don't actually have the capacity, or we don't want to spend the capacity for this. We're spending it for something else. But when the next capacity comes in a few weeks, your thing will be up next in line. Or third, you might go back and say, hey, this doesn't really show the ROI we expect. There's some beneficial business value, but it's actually not enough. Can you go optimize? And so a lot of decisions are made there. Let's assume we then do launch it. What happens is step 7, in which a back test is done. So instead of having the experiment where very few people got the feature, everybody globally pretty much gets the feature, and some small subset of people don't get it. So we've inverted the experiment that we did before. And this is going to be measured, and after a certain period of time, we can flag, did the amount of capacity we expected during the estimation match up to what happened in the end? And there's a number of reasons why it might not. Some of it could be related to how we're able to estimate things on smaller scale. Other things might just be a novelty effect. Like let's say you create, I don't know, avatars or something like that, and then like for that first week, everyone's making an avatar and using it, and a week later, no one cares. Right? And then you're like, we just spent all this extra compute costs and stuff to have this avatar feature. But that might be something where we'd realize like, hey, the business value that this appeared to have during testing no longer is really there. So like, we should just like get rid of that. Whatever it is, we'll have a post-launch review if there's a substantial difference in which people can make that decision, people who are a part of those teams to say, can we do it or not?
Can you explain who's making that decision?
It will be coming up in a bit. But basically, it's not people like myself who are at the central level of Instagram. We don't want to be the people making a decision for Reels or Stories. Arbitrating between different surfaces is just too difficult. So what we want to do is, part of this, is really federate it down. We want not the central team making it, but someone closer to the problem, the teams that are actually getting their business decisions and like the business metrics to decide for themselves, what do I want to spend things on? And so like, if you imagine this ROI framework, it becomes pretty easy. You can just think about like, if you have good bars based upon the metrics that you have, things that are really good, just fast track it. Let's get it out the door. Things that are way below on the other side, not worth launching. Maybe you need to rethink it. Things in the middle, you might have to do some more talks, defer things, optimize, and really becomes just a holistic point of view of like, what do we spend our next capacity on? How do we do it best? Finally, and this is what James was talking about, like, and then we talked about it a little bit earlier, but every surface has their own metrics, everything that matters to them. Example here is like, if I was video relevance, I might care about how fast people just nonstop swipe. Working at Instagram, I snoop into people, like seeing how they use the app, like when I'm on an airplane, and I'm always amazed by watching people using Instagram or TikTok. They're just like, you know, like there's like a 0.2 seconds or something that they're doing something, and I'm like, how, that can't be good. One, we're probably wasting all this capacity trying to guess what they want, and like half the time it doesn't work. So like video relevance might care about that as a requirement. Safety might care about all the times that minors are seeing things they shouldn't be seeing, you know, on the apps. And so every single group has their own business metrics, but the way that we measure cost is consistent across the company. And so those metrics are ones that we're able to say, okay, as we learn or as we grow and evolve that, everyone's getting it. And so the point here is that the ROI bar that I kind of imagined early on, it evolves all the time. We are actually able to measure more capacity things, the business metrics change as well. And then you can imagine that if you have a bar and everyone's getting above it, you should keep raising the bar because, you know, just looking for higher and higher ROI. All right, James will take us into the next section.
Yeah, so it's not all magic. There are some obstacles with this. Again, we've rolled this out now to, I don't know, it's like 3 or 4 different product areas. So FB and Instagram are probably the biggest. So again, we don't really seek to define like a consistent set of product metrics. We actually see this not as a problem really, but a feature. Now, where it becomes a problem is, of course, leadership says like, oh, I just want to stack rank all the different features, and what if I only shipped the top ROI features? Well, it doesn't work that way. Because you can't compare, like, you were saying safety with like, Reels. They're just not there. We've mostly won, I think, this battle. We usually allocate budgets to different areas, and so that's something leadership can do is they can say, well, this area gets this many $1 million, and this area gets this many million. And that's how we really compare across areas. We say, well, you've got your budget to work within. However you seek to use that budget, that's up to you. We're not going to try to define within your area. And different large areas can actually recursively, allocate their budget and have different ROI at different places. It's also not logical. There's a lot of stuff that gets shipped that's like, well, that doesn't actually bring in any revenue. If anything, it probably hurts revenue. It's been no secret, I think, like, Reality Labs loses money, but like, as a strategic thing, you put money into it, right? So we're not trying to save money. We're not trying to make sure that the company's, more profitable or anything. What we want to do is we want to give this information to the business deciders. We want to give it to the product team so they can manage it locally. If they come up with a nonsensical product goal, that's fine. I think we've done our job as long as we can calculate it correctly. The other big thing, again, and this is probably not surprising, not all changes are isolated. So if you're doing something very, strictly on like one product service, like the example I gave of like high definition video for Reels, that's really only going to affect one product surface. If you want to do something like, changing a backend library, it's very likely you're going to impact a ton of things. So questions always come up, well, who pays for this change? If you did an experiment and it impacts 30 different product teams, who signs off on that? So most of those end up having to be, kicked back to these central teams to kind of go figure out and manage. But by far, that is not the majority of the stuff we deal with. And the majority actually can be handled automatically, that green category you have, where it's clearly red and it's just not going to ship.
I'll say one thing that's like obvious, like if you think about it, if you never had notifications, like when your app's there, you never go back to it, but if, like, imagine notifications are created for the first time. There's a cost to coming up with, should I send a notification? Yep. But like, once I get notified by Instagram, and then I want to take a break. I'm gonna go see what this person's put in their story. And then I'm spending my time going through everyone's stories, and suddenly I'm watching Reels, and I'm like, probably not a productive 15 minutes of my life. Well, guess what? Like, that is stuff that does get measured, and that would incur costs on stories and Reels. Although, like, the actual feature that was created was really for notifications. So that's like one very clear example of like the lack of isolation that gets a little tricky, and that you have to, figure out how do you deal with this budgeting problem.
Yeah, I will say that's one area I think we're investing in going forward is when we have some of these more complicated features, how can we, split the cost and handle allocation then? It's just not been the biggest problem, so right. It's not the most pressing issue. I will say the biggest challenge here, and this is probably obvious to everyone in the room, this is not easy to implement. So this is not something where we can, have an open source library. You actually have to instrument a lot of your shared services and be able to join it with your experimentation data. There are a lot of open experimentation platforms. Some are free, you kind of self-host. Some you pay for as a service. In theory, you could take that data and join it there. But what you have to have is the telemetry data to be able to say, well, this request or this, sub-request actually was for this user who's in these sets of experiments. It is absolutely possible. You don't have to be meta to do this, but it's not easy. But the benefit we get out of this is tremendous. We've really been able to federate a lot more as a result of this. And as I mentioned earlier, low-level changes are completely out of scope. So if we make some optimization to Linux that saves 10%, there's no way we can do a user-based experiment on that because we don't send specific users to specific services. So there are tremendous benefits here. This is something that really did get Instagram out of a bad spot. It's also helping Facebook, and we're rolling it out to most of our products. The biggest thing here is that it really changed how teams look at stuff. Because before it was, well, I moved the product metric, that's great, that was my goal, I did such an amazing job. And the reality is that often came at the expense of costing the company money. So unless you're fully considering that, it's not great. And what would end up happening is, our teams would end up having to come in later and say, hey, I know, we said we did such a great job, but it actually was washed away by the cost entirely. So I would say the benefit about doing it the way we've done it is that it's a very non-confrontational way. We're simply doing almost a show back to the individual product teams and saying, hey, you're empowered to make this decision. We're not here to set a specific bar. You have to live within your budget, but this is the data. And they're mostly okay with that. Teams find, if the ROI calculations aren't good, they simply fix them and adjust them. If they don't like the specific measurement that they're using for their product metrics, they go talk to their product manager and they change it as a result. So we don't really find people fighting with these numbers. In fact, we see more and more teams saying, oh, I want to add to this, or you're missing one metric that we should be considering. So this has actually been very successful, I think, in terms of fixing the social problem, in terms of the gatekeeping.
Yes, definitely. So lastly, again, since we've done this, we have had no actual site-wide freezes like we used to, where it'd be like, hey, everyone just chill out, go make some stuff happen, find some optimizations. Federating it has its own challenges because we don't necessarily have true guards that punish people. So there's a bit of a social aspect of how do you get people to do the right thing for the overall group, while it might not be the greatest thing for them individually. So there's some difficulty still with that. But in general, federating this out, splitting up the knowledge and responsibility has greatly enabled us to just stay on target, although the complexity of the spaces continue to increase over time. And really, it's just been able to help people just understand their efficiency more, and we have actual data to show them, look, you guys are not behaving responsibly. We can see how much you guys have spent against what you have in budget. Why am I going to send you more budget from the top level? So it's been good overall to just be able to kind of spread this out and help people realize it to be part of the decision making in building things. Last slide. Real quick here, this is just a subset of the many people that have worked in some way, shape, or form on this tooling. Some of them are Instagram, some are part of the FOA, part that James is part of. One in particular, she was going to be here, but then she couldn't make it, is May. She's been a PM that's helped us really enable this go from being just an Instagram-specific capability out across the company. And that's it.
That is indeed it, but there are still 10 minutes left for Q&A before the scheduled snack break. So if you haven't seen one of these before, it's a microphone that is padded that you can throw. So if it hits you in the face, you'll be fine, but I will aim to toss it the first time, and then you all will toss it to each other. Who would like to open with the first question? All the way over there, here we go. Oh, I don't play sports, but that was pretty close.
Nice, we did it. So you talked a lot about federating responsibility and whatnot. How closely aligned would you say the average individual contributor at Meta is with the business goals? You talk a lot about the person who gets a ticket and sits down and starts coding, are they thinking business goals as they start to write code?
Yeah, I would say that from a product engineer perspective, they absolutely have their own individual team's goals, which, there's this idea that my team's goals do not directly one-to-one map to this level, to the next level, ultimately to the dollar bill. But they have those in mind. So they're thinking oh, okay, I assume that we want to bring up reshares. What can I do in order to make Reels reshares easier? And that's really the part that they're involved with. They're hoping, I think, in some ways that how they're going to design the capacity won't be too heavy. But I would definitely say most of them don't have a super great idea of what the capacity is. And if I can be real for myself, most of the time I call an API, I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. I'm we call this thing and stuff happens. And so finding out afterwards, you're okay, some visibility is there. And
got it. So the engineers will then end up consuming the data that comes back from you all. And okay.
Yeah, so when they ship the feature, they're basically tagged on that launch request.
Okay.
And they were always doing a review of sorts just for the business perspective, even way back when. It's just now the capacity is part of it. It's also another lever they have to be considering in the process of building things.
Very cool.
That was a very short throw.
Yeah, really short throw. Question about, I like how you said it was difficult to implement, and I tend to think it looks impossible because the number of things that are changing, the new features that are going in, the speed with which we're accelerating, I find it hard to believe that your monolith is not changing underneath you while you're trying to do all this stuff at the same time. Maybe you can comment on that.
So I think the thing that you're pointing out is that like, hey, your change, how exactly does your change not get impacted by everyone else's changes happening at the same time? And the reality is, okay, I'm not a stats guy, so the stats person says like, we made a big enough population of all this stuff, and then we can compare the control versus test on this. And so as long as it's large enough, and that's where like the error bars come in.
And you got a big number of users, so yeah.
So one thing we do have is we have intermediate units that we meter. So the cost of those units is obviously going to change over time. We hold them static for the purpose of this, and then we reevaluate what the cost is. So like a gigabyte of storage is not a fixed cost. It's not with a cloud provider. It's certainly not internal. We get a different mix of hardware. It changes. And so that's why we're really looking at, okay, this is the unit you changed.
No, I love the idea.
Those are usually fixed.
Cool.
There's at least one question in the far back. Oh, nice.
It's fun to throw.
All right. Can you hear me? Okay. So great talk. Thanks for sharing with us. One of the areas that I'd love to understand is what happens when capacity is returned and it has to intermix back into the experimentation loop. Mm-hmm. Do you have the same grading criteria? You treat it as the same capacity, or you treat it as a reinvestment into the business because you're already paying for it, you already procured the capacity?
I would say it varies. So some teams will unship things and then keep it to themselves. So just a budget reallocation.
But do you keep that as an entitlement for the team? So
Yep.
Okay. So but what's to say that they are the right curators or temporary leases of the capacity? Does your leadership make that decision back saying
so
maybe
like
we should move it
the
out?
capacity itself is like fully, like you can use anybody's. Like there's not like, hey, there's a specific pathway of reals, right? It's using the same machines as stories and feed. So if they give it back, their usage goes down, but their quota didn't change at all. So they still have a certain amount of like total quota budget that they have available. And so it's just like virtually returned from their perspective. And we are expecting them to stay virtually underneath that. So another group could, in theory, use it. But like we've said, it doesn't really matter as long as everyone stays underneath their quota lines.
Got it. So just apologies. The quota adjustments only happen during budgetary planning cycle?
More or less.
More or less, yeah. The quotas are decided, say, in that part that I described 9 months out, what we're going to buy. And then as we're getting to each quarter, like we start distributing it out to the different surfaces, the amount of quota that they're going to get.
No, I was asking the surface level quota question. So you're saying that, okay.
Yeah. So they know approximately they need this much in storage, this much in compute.
And like any human aspect, they've also found that a great way to get more if they're actually tight is to beg and like escalate. So like we still have those problems like that. You don't think you can get, unless you get the humans out of everything, you can just expect that to always occur.
But having the data makes the begging less useful because it starts to be like, well, where's your data?
Yeah.
And then they don't have the data.
But they still try to beg anyway, so I'm gonna point that out.
There was another question up front. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, whoever.
Yeah, I'll do one real fast and pass it that way. For this capability in general within Meta, do you guys have capacity reservation for this A/B testing, or did you already have that prior and plugged into that?
You mean dedicated for the A/B testing?
Right.
It's just floating capacity.
It's floating.
Yeah, so we basically use the same production capacity. Mm-hmm. So the experiments like you would be in, it's very small. So if it's truly tragic and it just uses we would cut that experiment off automatically.
Very cool.
Yeah, thank you. Question about the cost, right? So this the formula in the bottom is infrastructure cost, and you talk about you are measuring the usage, and then you use the usage essentially to the consumption to attribute or charge back to maybe the service cost. What about, is there a service? Do you have I think for you might have a layer of services that is depends on each other. So how you navigate that dependency layer?
Yeah, let me go back to the slide really quick. It's a little bit further. So we actually do what's called context propagation. One more.
Keep going. There we go.
So you can see the data flow from a request, and even though it came from a user through the front end, we actually propagate that it was for this surface there.
Okay, I see. So you from that you propagate all the way to all the service, and then you charge
every
that.
single one of them will just take, oh, this is feed, and wherever that spams out across everything, they all know it's from that user and for feed.
Right. Thank you.
One final burning question in the back, and then we will wrap up for snack time.
Yep, I have two questions. One is, how do you deal with the bursty workloads? Yeah, like if you plan out months long, and then you're like, there's a sudden burst. How do you deal with that? And then the second one is, you mentioned that there are features that doesn't pan out on the ROI. Can you talk more about like what mechanisms do you, like, is that a platformic system in Meta that actually takes the capacity out of them, or is it the teams that actually just undeploy their service?
So your first question was how do we deal with bursty workloads? So bursty workloads we usually charge at peak unless they can run on sort of our elastic capacity tier. Because if we have to pre-allocate the capacity, it is what it is. You should optimize it to be a little bit more smooth out. We do have an elastic tier that kind of handles that on the other direction, but it's not guaranteed that you get that capacity. So you can't suddenly decide you need an immediate burst because someone may be using it that you can't take it. Okay. So that's kind of how we handle that, is even if it's bursty, we kind of charge you what it takes to reserve the capacity. But we really discourage that. If we know it's going to effectively be 10% utilization, we would say, can you redesign your application so it can run asynchronously, using lower cost capacity? And in your second one?
Second one is, what do you, like what's the mechanism that actually reclaim the capacity back? Is it teams doing manual changes, or?
So we don't actually reclaim the capacity. So it goes back, I think, to the other question around like the budgeting cycle. If a team is not using their capacity but was allocated it previously, that just shows up when they do planning. And so leadership has visibility into what they're currently using. And so if they said, I need 50% more, and they've got a 10% utilization rate, they can certainly ask for that. They're not going to get it because people can see that you already have it. Why are you asking for more when you're not using what you're?
Gotcha. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Joshua, James, thank you. A final round of applause.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. Thanks for watching. Check out the rest of our channel for more FinOps content. Like, subscribe, and leave questions and comments for our speakers. We appreciate your support.